Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
Let's start with solving problems and then figure out how to make money, not try to make money and figure out if there's a problem to solve.
Welcome, Ecom Logistics Nation. Today we welcome Jonathan Poma, the co-founder and CEO of Loop. Under Jonathan's leadership, Loop manages an astounding 2 million returns each month and has enabled Shopify brands to retain over 1.1 billion in sales. With over 13 years of experience in e-commerce and startups, Jonathan has made a significant impact in the industry. Jonathan, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Yeah, and likewise. Thanks for having me.
This is the second time we are having a conversation with Jonathan, including the panel that we did. I've left this out for curiosity for myself as well. When I say you've been around for 13 years in e-commerce and startups, and you got to be living under the rock to not know who Loop is, but why don't you also tell the audience a little bit about both yourself and Loop?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in e-commerce since 2011, 2012, but in the Shopify ecosystem since 2013. I grew up in northeastern Ohio. My dad was an entrepreneur, a very different kind of entrepreneur, but he was in insulated glass, so sold to window companies and bought from PPG in Pittsburgh. But he was digital native. He had an old Timex watch that he held up in front of a laptop in 1999, and it put his contacts in his calendar and his watch way back then. So he passed away when I was in college, but I picked up, I think, a bunch of my digital native stuff from him and maybe some of the entrepreneurship as well. But I went to school in Miami University, live in Columbus, Ohio, been married for almost 15 years, have a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And I was working as an information architect, business analyst at a boutique consultancy from 2010 to 2013. I was fascinated with the Optimizely team, who was the team behind the Obama 2008 campaign, which was like the first presidential campaign ever to use personalized messaging. And it was transformational in terms of what happens on the internet. And the team behind that started Optimizely. And I wanted to bring a hypothesis-driven design methodology to my work at this consultancy. And I brought it and I got certified and we started winning bigger contracts and getting fewer rounds of feedback and getting merchants to opt in, or not merchants, our customers to opt into this hypothesis-driven stuff. Eventually, we ended up working on Donato's Pizza in the early days of responsive web design and mobile online ordering. And we launched an Optimizely experiment, had some big impact on online ordering. That was really the beginning of me falling in love with e-commerce. So I hooked on e-commerce in like 2013 and got recruited away to lead e-commerce for a digitally native brand here in Columbus called Homage. We were on a predecessor to Magento called Zencart. I moved us to Shopify. I moved us to Shopify Plus in 2013. Shopify was still a Series C company, and then saw an opportunity to take my consulting experience and my Homage experience and start an e-commerce consultancy. I started an e-commerce consultancy called Rocket Code in 2014. That was one of the first 3 or 4 Shopify Plus agencies. And Chubby's Shorts was a company who had long been in the Shopify ecosystem. Their founders saw that Homage had launched on Shopify, asked a few folks at Shopify who did that work. They put them in touch with me. I sold them literally an Optimizely mobile navigation optimization project, got a $5,000 deposit check, and quit my job at Homage full-time and started doing Rocket Code from my kitchen counter. I basically posted up at home for about a year and a half before we opened an office, but grew Rocket Code through 2017. In 2015, Chubby's came to us with a problem with returns. And when I say it was like serendipitous, they were having a problem with returns, and I grabbed one of my designers and one of my engineers, and we pulled up Shopify's API docs and stood at a whiteboard, and we proof of concepted what would become Loop in about 15 minutes. We put together some Envision prototypes in about 2 weeks, sent them over to the Chubby's team. They were like, this is great. So about 8 weeks later, we launched what we called Chubby's RMA, the Return Manufacturer's Authorization. And I still knew nothing about software, nothing about scaling a business. I wanted to sell it as a project to win more clients at Rocket Code. And Kyle Hensey, who was the founder at Chubby's, looked at me and he was like, hey, this isn't a project. This isn't your agency. This is a new company. Returns is a big problem. Shopify is growing. We need to do this for everybody. So we formed a new company, half owned by Rocket Code and half owned by Chubby's. That would eventually become Loop. You hit some of the stats, but nearly 4,000 merchants, about 16% of all the GMV on Shopify, 2.5 million returns a month, and continuing to grow. The returns landscape and the ecosystem has changed a bunch. This is a standard category and a need of everybody today. And when it was 2018, 2019, we were like explaining to the world that there needed to be, that like this was a problem worth solving and that they should buy software for it.
I can only imagine, first of all, phenomenal story. And the fact that you saw the opportunity, you say serendipitous, right? But the right place, right time.
Totally.
But there is a part of recognition to say this thing, the Shopify thing, because I was there in the logistics space at that time as well. The amount of people that were like, oh, it's just another fad that's coming up, right? But Shopify, this thing to recognize it and then take it and say, okay, that's where I am going to stick to that ICP. And I think we are going to talk about once you scale to that level, what happens next. But for you to be able to recognize and then double down, and your board having the faith in you to actually grow it to the level that you have, it's an amazing story. If I'm not mistaken, you would probably represent the largest amount of returns generation on Shopify's platform. Would that be
totally
accurate?
Certainly accurate, yeah.
And let's get down to that app-generated returns. One of the things, and I can tell you specifically from a logistics perspective, the party was going, customer acquisition was really easy, right? Pre-pandemic, during pandemic, something changed last year, right? And I have never heard of returns being such an important part of conversation on a day-to-day basis as it has been this year.
Totally.
Something truly changed. What do you think is that hypothesis around what changed? What is causing that?
And I remember vividly Friday, March 13th, 2020. That happened. The whole world stopped. We had no sales for about 30 days. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. The month of March was completely dry for our business. Then everybody's staying at home. Everybody's spending money online. Interest rates are low. There's money being given back to consumers, and e-commerce took off. When you're working on managing growth, orders are coming in, customers are discovering our product. We need to make it easy to handle returns because we've got all these other places where we need to be spending time and spending energy, and we need to be handling our inventory and figuring out our supply chain and our merchandising and all of this stuff, just managing all of this growth. Honestly, from 2019, even 2018 through the first half of 2022, those merchants' same-store sales on average across our book of business were somewhere between 30 and 80%. So our merchants were growing between 30 and 80% year on year. But then we look at those metrics now, this past quarter, Q2 2024, on average, our merchants' GMV was down 4%. Over the last 12 months, year on year merchant GMV growth, same store sales, has been somewhere, call it between 3 and 8%. So if you just think about what's happened to the merchants and their businesses, imagine planning for 30 to 80% growth and that being your normal, and then that being reduced by 90%. That's a complete dislocation of your entire business. When you're not growing that way and you need to find profits, you look for places that are not optimized. In this world, there's a primary flow of products, and products go from a warehouse out to a customer. And whole businesses get built around that. If we were to go look at a warehouse together, there's robots and clean floors and all this sort of stuff for outbound. And the alternate flow, the returns coming back, are effectively dumpsters of cardboard boxes, and from the time from it gets to the dock to being restocked can be weeks, and it's super messy, and interest rates are higher, capital is more expensive. Yep. You have to look inside your business at areas that are not optimized. And the place that it isn't in modern brands is, in my opinion, returns. And more than returns, reverse logistics. And so when I think about the cost of a merchant's returns program, a merchant who pays us $100,000 for software pays about $600,000 in return shipping labels, pays another $300,000 in exchange shipping labels, pays maybe $500,000 to process returns. If you just look at the cost center of the business and all of the things that are not optimized and overly expensive, and where there's actually really good information and data that's not being leveraged to help them run their business in a more intelligent way, yeah, it's the last rock to turn over to find profits in your business.
It actually is. And that aligns exactly the way our hypothesis is built around what is happening in the market. And there is this other aspect of, you can't just go in and make a massive change to your policy, as an example, right? Like, when the margins were good, as you said, right, and the growth was really good, the customer acquisition was much easier, policies were set. And then you got the other merchandising giant, Amazon, trying to set tone of what returns are supposed to be and how easy they are supposed to be. On the flip side, you can just go and say, oh, now I'm not going to do returns, or I'm going to start charging a lot of money for returns or something of that. You can't just do that. Mm-hmm. So it now comes down to personalization, right? Where do you see the personalization space go? Value to brand and optimizing cost and protecting the bottom line, because there is personalization on two fronts. One is that really important customer, but then there is also the bad actors, right? And it's a combination and trying to figure out it's no longer, and we are moving hyper, not metadata personalization, but individual personalization.
Yeah, not either we're both correct or we're both drinking the same Kool-Aid. Where I would start with personalization is Amazon. And yes, they have always set the standard for what the customer-obsessed experience should be. And yes, they started with free returns and all of this sort of stuff. But if you think about it, like they've got revenue and profits in Amazon Web Services, and like they've got profits coming from everywhere that make some of that stuff possible. It doesn't necessarily mean that it works for merchants, but merchants have had to keep up with it. And what's true about Amazon is they know everything about every customer shopping everywhere. And shopping everywhere on Amazon, and it's all tied to your account, and it's all tied to Prime. If I'm not mistaken, there's something like 300 million Prime members in the States, or 300 million Prime members worldwide, or something like that. And what they have that modern brands don't have, individual brands don't have, is an accountability lever, right? So if you mess with Amazon and you send back a fraudulent return, your account's just gone. Your whole Prime history, everything you do, your account's gone, and they know your IP address and they know your home address, and you're just locked out. So they can give the best experiences in the world because they know everything about you, and the consequences of getting caught by Amazon are remarkably high. When someone is sending back a fraudulent return, if you take a Viore t-shirt to Happy Returns and you put a Hanes t-shirt in instead, and you send it back to Viore, no. The likelihood that anyone's going to know and you're going to not get your refund is very low. You're going to get your refund. There are all these signal communities of people ripping off brands, explaining how they do it. Just like, here's what you can do. Here's how to do it. There are books you can buy, weirdly, on Amazon about how to defraud and retailers in returns and commit returns fraud and returns policy abuse and all that sort of stuff. But it's just right now, I think we're in the maturation phase of what's happening in returns. Many industries, this started, it was free returns, free exchanges for everyone all the time. And then it's like, that doesn't work. But I think what is starting to happen is there's a real desire to have individualized policies. And there are other things happening in the space that also make some of this possible. Like a few years ago, it was something like 30% of shoppers at checkout on Shopify were identified, and 30% of checkouts were ShopPay. ShopPay isn't just a payment gateway. ShopPay is an identity layer. And that's now being pulled upstream to the storefront and the shopper account, and you log in with shops. If 55 or 60% of shoppers are identified at checkout with ShopPay, in 6 months, those shoppers are all going to be identified on the storefront as well. There's like infrastructural stuff happening to enable merchants to do things they've never really been able to do before, which is identify exactly who you are when you're shopping and think about what you're doing. And there's abuse on the negative side, and then there's VIP and new and all of these things, lifetime value based on the positive side. The envisioned future for me is a baseline return policy that is either dialed up and made better for you based on who you are and how you behave at that merchant and across other merchants, or made worse for you based on how you behave at that merchant and across merchants, not dissimilar to the accountability of your 5-star rating as an Uber rider.
So there's the VIP side of things, right? Of course, there is more personalization. Some brands actually, from a policy perspective, are designed in a way that they want to allow for returns as part of their core, right? Like I actually worked on Warby Parker back in 2012, right? Like helping develop their distribution center, which was like literally 100% returns.
Holy cow, yeah.
100% returns. And it was shared with the site that we ran FedEx Fulfillment from. And so the other side of the wall was actually Warby Parker operation. And you would see like 100% return coming in. And that's kind of part of the play, right? Like at that point. Now we are starting to get back to that, where there are certain brands that are designed for that level of returns, and some brands coming from Orient, as you can imagine, the amount of returns that is being generated out of that, a whole different ecosystem altogether. But there is that VIP personalization to recognize that this is a top buyer, right? There is a difference between a top buyer, but is that top buyer also the top returner, right? There is a correlation between the two to try and identify. You can't identify someone as top just because it seems like they just spent the most amount of money. They might have also spent the most amount of money returning stuff to you.
Even just on that simple point, that is data that is not easy for a merchant to find out about their net of returns. Shopify is obviously a mature platform, but 12 months ago, they didn't have a returns API. Nearly today, there still isn't an exchanges API. So there was no such thing as a return, and there was no real thing. There's still no such thing as an exchange. But it's not easy for merchants to figure that stuff out. It's really easy to see how many orders they placed and how much money they've spent, but not net of returns.
Also, there's the other side of the equation, because again, talking about Amazon as an example, and I don't know what happened, but at one point I was always getting the option to say, for shipping, it would say, if you want to return something, or no, they would say, if you want to delay your shipment, we'll give you a $1 credit or $2 credit, right? Mm-hmm. And then that option went away. And I observed that from Loop's perspective, you've introduced something that's like the offset model. Can you explain a little bit on that model? Because I think that's really important to understand that how much value creation that's happening for merchants in utilizing something like an offset model of charging for returns before at the time of purchase, as an example.
Yeah, totally. I think the gold standard, if we can all do it, is free returns and free exchanges, right? Every merchant would love to be able to do that. We as shoppers would love to do it. But if I were to show you a chart from 2019 to today of merchants charging fees on return outcomes in Loop, 30% of merchants were charging fees, maybe less in 2018. And today it's 72% of merchants are charging fees to customers. So the days of free returns are gone. There are still brands who are doing it, and God bless them. I love the idea of not charging for returns. That said, 70% of our merchants are now charging for returns. And why are they charging for returns? Because labor costs are higher, because logistics and shipping costs are higher, and because interest rates are higher, and all the stuff we've already talked about. And if we want these brands to exist, we have to help them as their costs increase, cover some of that. I saw somewhere that you could buy the right to free returns for $3 on some merchant. I was like, no one's ever going to want to pay for that. And what turns out to be true is I was dead wrong. That's why we should always do customer research and not just listen to our own intuition. And so I started asking myself, like, why was I wrong and why is this working? I used to think, okay, here's what a merchant's paying us for software. And then what I looked at was what is the cost of their returns program and what they pay in outbound labels and what they pay in exchange labels and refund labels and all this sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, the return software cost is 10% of the program cost. The rest is all of this other stuff.
Yep.
And in a world where free returns are the norm, saying, hey, Nanad, you can get free returns and free exchanges on this order unlimited if you pay 2% of the AOV at checkout, that's a worse experience. Mm-hmm. But in a world where that's no longer the norm and where 70% of shoppers are being charged fees, $7, $8, $9 fees, when they come back to return and it's unexpected, it's a pretty damaging customer experience. And so we launched a beta of Offset. And just to be clear on that model, we're going upstream to the checkout and putting in front of the customer, hey, and here is an option to pay $1 now so that you don't have to pay a fee later. So if you pay $1 or $2 now, you're not going to pay a big fee when you return later. If you don't pay now, that's fine. You don't have to, but you'll pay a larger fee later. And we're seeing like a 65, 70% attach rate on that like SKU.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. I still don't love the idea of charging, but it's an interesting model. And that model is really compelling at a place in time. Again, if I pontificate out into the future, I think what ends up being true is that's not the model for everybody. Some customers just get free returns all the time. Some customers just get charged all the time. Some customers are presented with the opportunity to pay now to avoid the larger fee later. Who knows what that looks like? But what's neat is we can look and start to build for that future and learn from merchants and build what they want. I think the last frontier that we really need gets into reverse logistics and being able to get to the dispositioning of the return when it gets back to the warehouse and say, is the item here what it was supposed to be? Is it at an acceptable level of quality? And can we, pun intended, close the loop back with the shopper and the rest of the returns experience across the whole platform?
Maybe I'll skip ahead on that because you touched on that very particular subject of there is data upstream, but then there is the logistics data. And that's the arena that I work in so much. Is there is so much goodness in data, but it all resides in these like disparate systems all over the place. A lot of retailers are using their core WMS to do it. Now there are specialized tools out in the market or execution systems that are actually helping them do it. But that data's feedback loop does not happen back to the RMA systems or where that intelligence has to reside. I think that needs to change. Logistics is somehow driven by commerce's decisions rather than working hand in a lot of cases. And I want to see the world actually change where commerce and logistics gets much more closer from a data perspective. It's like a missing puzzle to me. Like, of course, to you, that piece of data is super critical. How do you see that evolve?
There's like dramatic incentive misalignment to make this work. This being like effective reverse logistics. Okay, so logistics providers, warehouses, WMSs. The entire business is optimized for outbound. The software is optimized for outbound. The square footage is optimized for outbound. The money is made there and on the labels that get generated on the 3PLs account for the outbound. And the reverse, the software is not optimized for it and the floor space isn't optimized for it. We're dealing with a remarkably fragmented ecosystem of WMSs with different levels of capabilities in processing returns. And my belief is that we actually have enough volume in our system to be the initiator of change in that environment. It's kind of insane that fulfillment centers process returns, right? Like they're fulfillment centers, they're not returns processing centers. And why did that happen? And it's because a package looks like a package, and the people handling your packages on the outbound are just like the people who handle your packages on the inbound. And if I were drawing on a whiteboard, I would like say, here are the three markets that matter. There's somewhere near New Jersey, there's maybe somewhere near Nashville, Tennessee, and there's somewhere near Denver. And if you wanted to get into it, maybe there's Los Angeles, but call it 6 markets that matter. And I think what should be true is there should be a fulfillment center in the middle, and then there should be returns processing centers of a very short, less than truckload shipment away that returns can get shipped to, that have specialized software and specialized workforce and all that sort of stuff. But you need a returns initiator who has enough volume to make that possible. So what I want to do, what I'm going to ask our merchants is, hey, are we too early? Or is the market actually ready for a returns management provider, warehouse provider, and returns processing partner? Let's build a collective solution that is completely optimized, where we reduce the costs of shipping, we reduce the cost of processing, and we maintain all the important business KPIs that are related to processing your returns, getting them back in stock, damaging them out, liquidating them, all that sort of stuff. And it's not going to get solved in this world of like warehouse management systems optimized for outbound, continuing to try to handle this reverse stuff.
Listen, there is goosebumps when you're talking about this, right? Because I've been talking about it for the longest time. First of all, on the outbound side, right? If a baseline merchant, you essentially go for 2 outbound warehouses. That's your ideal position, depending on your volume, but ideal position just because of ground network 2-day delivery gets you to about 92, 93% using a FedEx, UPS, DHL type of combination and USPS to be able to get your products out the door. So that's like your baseline, and you want that optimization. And even if you look at Deliver's old network, right? If you were to talk about that, right? Like their equation always was, even in a marketplace position, I put it in 4 different locations, generally speaking, right? So you send me inventory, I put it in 4. 4 is good enough to get it to the customer promise at the cheapest rate possible for shipping, right? So that's one side of the equation. On the flip side, when it comes to returns, completely agree with you, right? Like most warehousing systems are not optimally designed, and you are absolutely correct, because most people look at RMAs like they look at ASNs, right? That's the other inbound object. ASNs are truckloads of product or boxes coming into your door. That's very organized. It's coming from manufacturer. It's coming from distributor. That's what you're receiving. You receive it. You do some high-level cursory audit, right? Depending on the vendor that you are receiving it, your vendor has 3 classifications, A, B, C, right? Your vendor compliance program goes, if you are A, I'm going to, let's say it's Walmart and I'm receiving Johnson & Johnson. I believe 100% of what you say. B, you're someone that I've known, but I still need to do a 5% quality check. And if you're C, I'm going to do 20% quality check and I'm going to graduate you, right? That is your traditional inbounding process. from a quality audit perspective. Now let's talk about the returns dispositioning side of the universe. Every box is unique. It's a new vendor. It's a vendor meaning the customer that's shipping it back to you.
Yep.
You have, up until very recently, I'm talking about 5 years ago, the universe worked on a very Boolean static logic. It essentially went disposition and grading, two combinations, and it was one-to-one mapping, right? You do it at a category level. So if you had 100,000 items as a general merchandiser that you sold, you would categorize within the 20 categories, bath and kitchen, right? Apparel, footwear, etc. And then you would basically go footwear. If it's your tribal knowledge, you would go good is equal to destroy, put it back in stock. Bad is equal to refurbish, and ugly is equal to just destroy the product. That equation has changed now, algorithmically speaking, with the specialization of new tools coming in play. They're doing a phenomenal job at actually identifying very unique criteria, not at a higher level, but bringing it down to a more granular understanding. That is where the equation's going. And then talking about specialization. So if you look at the rise of multi-client fulfillment, and Shopify definitely drove this, right? Like similar to your company, like the need increased. You saw the rise of ShipBob, Stored, Shipmonk, all of these folks, right? Like Flexi, etc. That's purely driven, right? Shopify has been the underlying catalyst to that type of network development that has ended up happening. But most of these networks are driving that outbound volume. And so you will see that very small percentage of their customer base happens to be the higher end merchant, because the higher end merchant eventually go to a more larger, more mom and pop type of 3PL environments, right? I think on the flip side, when it comes to returns, I think there will be more willingness in that mid-market and the upper market, let's call the top 1, 2, 3% of Shopify, would be more than happy to say, I am willing to do a shared specialized if my net recovery on the return can be maximized by 10, 20, 30%. It goes back to the start of our conversation. This is like that last place to look for opportunities. And so if you are able to sort out, one is back to stock. Don't make it a fulfillment center. Back to stock, do a truckload movement right back as an ASN into your primary warehouses. Don't do back to stock, don't do primary forward, but everything else needs to happen from your center. I think that's a phenomenal, but it requires economies of scale. And I think,
because otherwise you just run into this cold start problem where it's, okay, hold on. Yeah. I need to get enough merchants on board to be able to have this specialized facility. And then it's like selling to a triple-sided marketplace all at the same time. It's just remarkably complex.
I think that there is this other side as well, Jonathan, which is specific to how you mentioned, like value creation for the merchant by saying, okay, I'll charge you $1 right now, but you can get credit as an example. If we take this into equation, and remember, the data belongs to these merchants at the end of the day, right? Even though they might be using different systems, different tiers of solving this problem, because that's what you're going to find out in the wild, right? The data belongs to the merchant. So what if there is an exchange and there is the systems, there is the merchants, and then there is you and your competitors as well. So Loop, Narvar, Aftership. If there is a neutral third party that can become the data exchange to generate value in exchange for that data, right? So the willingness to share data from your partners to you might not be there, right? Like at a metadata level either, right? Like, and the same thing's applicable at a merchant level. But if there was a neutral third party, non-profit type of structure, I don't even know the terminology for it, because I know the banking industry did this. The reason why we don't have as much fraud as we did about 10, 15 years ago in credit cards is because banks are sharing that level of bad actor data. So what if there was something about the greater good, someone being part of this network, this seal, right? And then you can do your own algorithms under the hood of what you want to do with it. I don't know. I thought that I'll be noodling on.
It's super compelling. I wouldn't quite say there is active cooperation and collaboration between us and competitors, but there is a friendliness and an openness to have conversations. There's certainly something there. And I tend to be positive sum enough in my thinking. If you're a part of this and we're solving problems for our customers and our warehouse partners, there's going to be a way for this to be good for me too. Let's start with solving problems and then figure out how to make money, not try to make money and figure out if there's a problem to solve.
I love it. I love it. And I got one last one for you. There is best in class, reverse logistics. I get asked this question all the time because even some of the reverse logistics platforms have capabilities for RMA generation, right? And then you see re-commerce best in class and resale best in class, but you also see some of the other players have other arenas. There is platformization, right? Like versus best in class. What do I do? Do I purchase something that addresses it all? In some areas, it's really good, but the other areas, it does just basic. Where are you seeing the industry go? And
so I guess if I start with even just patterns, I think this is a common pattern, and it's a pattern that usually plays out over a decade plus. You could look at cable television becoming unbundled to Netflix and Disney Plus and ESPN and Hulu and all this sort of stuff. And now everybody's like, I'm really sick of all this stuff. Can we just roll all these things back together? And it's a new bundling, but like over a 15-year period, we went from hating this bundled service to these specialized services, best in class, to I just want all of it. And it's a 15-year period. That's a trend happening in e-commerce, and there are competing forces on two sides. So e-commerce broadly, there's a trend toward vendor consolidation, fewer partners, fewer bills, fewer P&L line items, that sort of stuff. That trend is going to continue to play out over the next 5 or 6 years. And then by 2030, we're going to start to see new best-in-breed solutions pop up and all that sort of stuff. The competing force on the other side is that this is such early innings of solving returns and reverse logistics problems where it's not a stable market and there aren't best-in-class ways to process returns and handle reverse logistics. I think reverse logistics needs to and will go through a massive transformation over the next 5 years. And to go through a massive transformation, you need innovation. And to support innovation, you need best-in-class solutions. It's going to be compelling because you have an industry trend e-commerce wide of consolidation, and you have a trend and a part of that industry that's reverse logistics that is still in dramatic transformation. And so those two things are going to collide. I think the collision of that is going to be like, I know for certain that we need returns processing, and we don't have time or expertise to build it in-house. So we have to work with partners. And what you're going to see is coordination and collaboration between partners. When this is mature in 5 years and there's all this stuff, someone's going to say, we need to roll all this up into one big returns and reverse logistics company and handle the products and the services all together. But I think it's 2028, 2029 before the reverse logistics market is ready for that. And it's going to be in this weird collision with merchant expectations across e-com of consolidation. So it's going to be messy, is I think what's happening.
And I agree, right? And I love the fact that you call it reverse logistics in general. And it's not just returns, it's the logistics aspect of it. Because you can't always tech your way out of logistics. That's really critical to understand for a lot of people. And it's like pulling it all together is really hard. And to make it, you still need an ICP that you go after and say, I'm going to try and platformize to solve for across the board. I've been working close to 15, 16 years at this point in just a reverse side of the universe. It is definitely changing, but it almost feels like we are still just at the beginning.
Yep.
So,
yeah. The conceptual thing I'm very curious about is it's almost never that an idea is not the right idea. It's you either have the ability to will that into existence or you have to wait for market timing. I'm like so sold on the concept of returns processing centers and specialization and all that sort of stuff. I know that's coming. If we do nothing, I think it's 4 or 5 years away. And the question I'm asking myself is, if we get active in there with the right partners, can we make it 12 to 18 months or 18 to 24 months away instead of 4 to 5 years away? And I think yes.
I will say this, right? You are going to see a fight back from the larger players in the forward market in the SaaS place to try and recapture some of the opportunity on the reverse side. Because it's when we said warehouses ignored returns.
Yeah.
Warehouse management systems also ignored returns, right? Like it's two sides of that coin. And when they start seeing, hey, look, there is this other piece that's playing in there. So to my friends out in the both sides of the universe, I got to say, I think recognize that I don't think that the forward players are just going to lie down and take it. They are going to come in, and it's like the vantage point, right? From their perspective, that's platformization, right? It's like, where do I go next? And it's okay. Oh, there is additional revenue opportunity in doing that on the stuff that I'm already doing on the receiving side. I just need to add new feature sets. So it's going to get interesting before it settles in. Yeah.
I think that's right. I think that's right. We could talk about that forever, but yeah, it's going to be fascinating market dynamics because everybody needs to grow. And when you grow, it's like, where can you take up more logical surface area? And it's logical for all of us to be trying to figure that out from different directions with different lenses and different incentives and all that sort of stuff.
I love this conversation. It could literally keep going for a while. And I know we are on times. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the pod. Thank you so much. I would love to give you an opportunity to give a shout out to Loop and how can people follow you?
I've enjoyed it as well. But yeah, you can find Loop at loopreturns.com, at Loop on Twitter. I'm at Poma JP on Twitter, Jonathan Poma. You can find me on LinkedIn. Hopefully just help share information and provocative ideas and help people think about what level of prioritization reverse logistics should be getting in there when they plan for 2025 and beyond.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Yep. Cheers.
Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ. And I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the Ecom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the Ecom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the Ecom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference.